Thank you. Now we'll hear from Kristen Mello, representing Westfield residents advocating for themselves. And after that, Diane Cotter, then Philip Brand. Kristen Mello, forward or flip? It's okay. Here, I'll help you. Sorry, it's an awkward.
How's that? Is that okay? Can you hear me
That's
okay? Thank you. I would just really like to thank the DEP for holding this meeting, for inviting the residents of Westfield and Barnstable labeled as recognized stakeholders. That means an awful lot to those of us who've been drinking this water for decades. And we appreciate the opportunity to provide our commentary on the petition. I believe that this is our fourth visit for the residents to come into Boston to speak with members of the DEP and the Baker administration about our PFAS contamination issues. Each time we have come to visit, we have asked that PFAS be regulated as a class in Massachusetts. We didn't drink them one at a time. We drank them as a mixture. The effects that they have had on our bodies, particularly mine and my family's, my neighbors' families, they happened as a mixture. Regulating one at a time is not going to help anybody. So we would again reassert that request here today, regulate as a class. But for my part, my worry about this particular petition is the law of unintended consequences. In 2017, Chris Higgins reported that there are 40 distinct PFASs in a FFF impacted groundwater. Only 14 of which are tested commercially. So there are these 26 others we don't know anything about. And so I'm very with the petitioners up until about page 13, 14 of this petition, and then it goes off the rails for me because there is this scientifically unsubstantiated claim that this treatment train will be effective in protecting the public health, except there are all of these PFASs you can't test. So if they are in a FFF impacted groundwater, the commercial labs can't test for it. Non-detect for something you can't look for is not protective of the public health, and it has the potential to saddle our already very affected community with an undue environmental and financial burden that we simply cannot bear. We are sick, we need help, and we do not need someone to come in and say, we need another $30, $40 million from you in order to put in a treatment train that we won't even guarantee will stop this from being in your drinking water. So while I'm the first 13 pages, I'm totally with you, we go off the rails after because this treatment technique is not going to be helpful for Westfield. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. PFAS incineration is incomplete. The studies that have been done, only available from 3M, other friends, show that carbon tetrafluoride are coming out of the stacks, when even burning at 1,000 degrees. That becomes somebody else's inhaled PFAS exposure straight through their lungs. It's not okay for us to take our PFAS exposure and dump it onto some other community, particularly whose kids probably already have asthma from the incinerators in their towns. I believe that it is important to take a moment to say that the most vulnerable populations are populations like ours that have decades of exposure and generations of health effects. These are generations of breastfed babies who then grow up and breastfeed their babies on this same water, passing the PFAS along through an entire family, generations of it. These are the most vulnerable populations, not some, pregnant woman or a baby that came from somewhere else that had clean water the rest of that lady's life. The most vulnerable people are the babies born to the women who have had generations of PFAS exposure. And so the 70 is not low enough. We do need it as a class, but I would please ask the DEP to exercise great caution. The other thing I would like to say is that the novel methods mentioned in the petition, while theoretically promising, are not proven at scale. And because they are not We could go and spend a whole lot of money to make a treatment train, to bring things to non-detect for the 14 PFAS we can test for. And we could still end up with 20 PFAS we don't know are there, are still in the water, and are still poisoning us. So while we desperately would like you to regulate PFAS as a class and as low as possible, we need the analytical capacity to know what's in our water, and we need your help. Thank you.
Diane Cotter, then Philip Brown, and after that we have Laurel Shaver from Silent Springs. I would be happy to. How can I help? Oh, I just. Would you like to?
Sure. Anyway.
Is that all right?
Oh, gotcha.
Make sure it projects.
Can you hear me okay? Thank you. Good morning. I'm Diane Cotter, and I am an advocate for firefighters' PFAS exposure. Regarding the AFFF, October 2nd, 2017, the New Hampshire DES sent every fire station in New Hampshire a letter advising them to test their water. As recent findings showed, 6 of 7 stations tested elevated for PFOA or PFOS. This was an accidental discovery brought on by construction next to a fire station. Soil samples required by nearby building construction discovered high levels of PFOA at the firehouse. There are 58,000 fire stations in the USA. It would be wise to test every single station. Yesterday, I was told by a 30-year Massachusetts veteran firefighter that years ago they would wash the walls of their station with AFFF. They would wash their turnout gear with AFFF. They would wash their trucks with AFFF. They would take their gear home for their families to wash. They would then discharge their tanks into a nearby reservoir. I want to applaud the Massachusetts initiative to collect old AFFF to be disposed of properly and ask that this program continue. But today I'm here to talk about turnout gear. And what I have here is new, never worn turnout gear. This is from the year 2004. It's not contaminated. Contaminated in the fire service means that it has seen fire, it has seen a hazard, it has seen toxic smoke. This has never been worn. Please keep that in mind. Textiles make up about 30% of the fluoro industry footprint, but you hear a lot more about AFFF than you do of textiles. It was not the manufacturers of our gear, or the NFPA, or OSHA, the CDC, the EPA, or the ACC that told us the discovery of the staggering amounts of PFOA in new, never-worn turnout gear. It was a diagnosis of my firefighter husband's career-ending cancer that led to this discovery. Searching for information on chemical used in the manufacture of gear was hopeless. The manufacturers cited that it was proprietary information. They could not disclose it. They would not disclose it. These same manufacturers are immersed in every aspect of firefighter cancer research, prevention, outreach. But they will not discuss the chemicals in the gear. I went to the extreme length to purchase new, never-worn turnout gear in the hopes of finding a scientist somewhere who would be willing to test it for me. And I found him. We found Professor of Physics, Graham Peasley of Notre Dame. He relayed the initial testing results of this gear that the fluorine was so high in content that it must be counted in volume. Further testing would reveal PFOA in thousands of times higher than the new MRL. We've also had in that same testing PFNA, PFDA, PFHXS. PFOA causes testicular cancer, and testicular cancer is the #1 cancer in the fire service. Professor Peasley is right now testing 20 years worth of new, never-worn gear. And again, I want to stress that we have to do this ourselves. We're literally holding car washes and bake sales to fund our own testing because we can't get the information from those that are telling us they're protecting us. Please allow me to read this brief explanation of concern from the professor as we had a discussion yesterday. Professor, I have requested to give an oral statement, and I wanted to shed light on the amounts of long-chain PFAS used in the turnout gear that may be degrading in landfills for years. And the professor, very eloquent gentleman, stated, Diane, we don't know how much PFAS coating in a jacket will degrade into PFOA and how much will degrade into other PFAS, unfortunately. I do know the time scale on textiles like turnout gear will be on the order of a decade or two before it all decomposes. And I do know from the literature attached, he sent me 2 files, that the majority of clothing will decay in PFOA compared to other PFAS. Maybe 50 to 60% will end up as PFOA. This leads to a scary amount of PFOA in a typical landfill leachate. So to get you something more concrete, I went back to the measurement of the new turnout gear that had 116 parts per million of PFOA that was readily available from the material on the jacket. I am guessing that 95% remains on the jacket, but this was what would come off immediately if you soaked the jacket in water for a couple of days. I went to the internet and looked up how much material is in a men's jacket, and it's about 3 yards by 45 inches wide in fabric, or 1,620 square inches. Then I weighed a piece of fabric, jacket fabric in my lab from Boston Fire, and I calculated about 730 grams of fabric per jacket. This is under 2 pounds, which seems a little light, but there is a lot of reinforced cloth and buckles on a typical jacket that probably gives it a few more pounds, but no more PFAS. If there are 730 grams of fabric per jacket, and there are 116 parts per million PFOA per gram, then you end up with about 85 milligrams of free PFOA per jacket. This may not seem like much, but if you toss 2 jackets into an Olympic-sized swimming pool with 660,000 gallons of water, this amount of PFOA would exceed the 70 parts per trillion EPA standard for drinking water. This is without decaying in a landfill for 20 years. Imagining pants are about the same as a jacket, that means 1 set of new turnout gear tossed into water would produce enough waste PFOA to contaminate a full-size swimming pool. Then if you let it decay in a landfill for 10 to 20 years, you would probably get enough PFOA to contaminate 100 times that much. But the exact ratio of PFOA to other PFAS isn't known in decaying fabric, and the total amount of fluorochemicals applied to the clothing isn't known exactly by anybody but the manufacturers. So it's hard to say if this will be 100 or 500 times. But the bottom line is these heavily treated textiles will contaminate 300,000 gallons of water per item readily, and maybe 100 times that over a couple of decades in the landfill, which is a lot of water. There are some assumptions in here, but this is why I am concerned about the end-of-life disposal of turnout gear. Like carpets, they represent a significant source of PFAS for a few generations to come. And just a few things for you to consider. The turnout gear is replaced every 5 to 10 years. That's an NFPA standard they call for 10 years. Some gets used more readily, so it'll be replaced every much sooner than 10 years. It's recommended to have 2 sets of gear per firefighter. There are 1.5 million firefighters in the USA. Our guess is that the coatings began being impregnated in the 80s or 90s. Still, we have no idea. In Massachusetts, there's approximately 15,000 firefighters. And we are now told by the manufacturers that the new chemistry is C6. And they are telling us that it is safe. But they never told us that there was PFOA in our old gear to begin with. We have a trust issue here. And for the protection of the citizens of the Commonwealth health and for the protection of the citizens' remediation costs, we ask that PFAS be classed as a group. Thank you. Thank you. Go right in.
Philip Brown. And after Philip, we will have Laurel Shaver from Salisbury Institute.
Good morning, my name is Phil Brown. I'm a professor of sociology and health sciences at Northeastern University, and I direct the Social Science and Environmental Health Research Institute. One of our lab groups, which I direct, is a PFAS lab group. We have 2 grants from the National Science Foundation and 1 from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences to study PFAS. We also were one of the key organizers of the conference that you saw on the slide before when Shana Casper spoke. We will be having another one in 2019. We work with community groups and scientists all over the country and in other parts of the world, and also with government officials. And we compiled a list of contaminated sites, which even EPA told us nobody had ever done there. And along with the Environmental Working Group, using EPA's UCMR3 data, compiled the map, which is very widely used, and that map is really the source. When you hear 110 million people exposed, that is the source of it. So it's become very widely used as a resource. I've also been asked by the New York Department of Health to comment on their report and on the state of Connecticut to help them develop a program for evaluating what action they should take on PFAS. During my 30 years previously at Brown University, I worked extensively with Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management on a number of projects, and I am very aware of how important it is for the state environmental agency to take action. The DEP now has power to make that happen here, make a growing difference with a growing number of other states who are taking action to produce MCLs, and there's a lot to learn here. Our state can help also push the EPA eventually, as well as push other states to do this. And as we've heard, the EPA has dropped the bag on this. Some of you are probably aware that the U.S. Congress now has a bill in front of it to add PFAS to the CERCLA list. And if this is so, that will help a lot too. I think action by the DEP here could also be important for that. The scientific evidence is very strong. It's in the petition. It's in the testimony of others who've spoken here, so I won't speak to that. I will speak to the fact that this state has been a leader in the environment in so many ways. I think to the Toxic Use Reduction Institute and the monumental decreases in toxic emissions without loss of jobs, without corporations leaving the state. The country looks to Massachusetts as a state which can do this. We are also an incubator of environmental technology, and so all the new techniques, both for assessing toxicity, for exposure science, and for cleanup technologies, can be done here and can produce more jobs in our state for people to do this. So I take this as an opportunity to commend Conservation Law Foundation and Toxics Action Center, and to really deeply support the DEP in taking action on the proposals that the petition makes.